All right. Hello. Hello. Welcome back to Human Design Hot Topics. I am Rebecca. I'm with my beautiful co host, Janelle. And we have another super fun, amazing guest. Today, we have Teresa Brenneman, who is a 2-4 emotional managing. And we are so excited to talk to you about all things emotional managing because like we were just talking about right before we recorded, like we get kind of jealous of all the definition and all the fun energy and we're like, what is this like? So thank
Mhm.
you for sharing your energy with us. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yay. It's like the opposites attract, and the Paula Abdul song, right? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we're very attracted to this opposite person. And
Yes.
as we were saying before, when Rebecca and I are saying like we're jealous, we want this, we love our type, but it's still funny and fun to think about like what it would be like to be a different type. And there's certain aspects of different profiles and different aura types that sometimes just feel like they would be a really nice thing to have. But we don't have them personally, so we can't speak on it personally. And so that's why we have you here with us, because you can talk about what it's like to be so gosh darn defined.
Yay. I love talking about myself. So
Well, good. That's funny for a super open heart, like that you're like, yes, I love talking about
yeah,
myself.
I
I
don't
like
know
that.
what it is in my design. I mean, I have personal view.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I think, I've been in my process for 6 years now, and I've learned a lot about myself. And as a generator or manifesting generator, that's our whole thing is who am I? And so learning about ourselves through our process. And I feel like I probably have a lot to say about that at this point. So
Do you separate them? Generator and manifesting generator? Do
I
you?
was
yeah,
about to ask that too.
it's hard. I feel like when I'm talking to people, it's just a natural thing for me just to call myself a generator. But then people will be like, oh, well, what's your definition? And then I'm like, oh, I'm actually a manifesting generator. So I don't know. I feel like I should probably just say MG, but I use them interchangeably.
Interesting distinction to me because I know like originally that wasn't a thing. And then I've been listening to as many lectures as I can get about mental projectors, which at the time is like 3.
Yeah.
So one thing, but in like 2 of them, Raw is picking on the MGs. It's so funny. He's like, generators just think they're so important, they have to have a second time. But really the projectors are way more varied than any other type. So
Mhm.
it amuses me. And I'm like, I go back and forth between like all my one lines and my fear motivation is like, well, what is the answer? Like,
Mhm.
what's the thing? But then I just all my openness is like, well, what does it matter? Like, if people relate more to Manny-Gen as a label than generator, then great. Like, what's the big deal?
Mhm.
Yeah, I kind of I mean, I've rode my wave about it, and just gone through the awareness of it of does it really matter that much? And I think the big thing that I keep coming around to is when I talk to MGs, we notice there is such a distinction in how we operate and what
Mhm.
our processes look like. It feels important to say MG. And I've even asked some of my non-sacral friends who have hung out with me in person a lot and hung out with a lot of people in human design. Specifically, I have a friend who's a reflector, and I said, well, I don't really know what my aura feels like. What does my aura feel like to you? And she said, well, MGs have like a sharpness to them, or
Mhm.
I forget the exact word she used, but um, she said generators just feel really bubbly and kind of effervescent to her, whereas MGs, there's this a little bit of harshness there. And I thought that was really fascinating. And then she went in to describe an exact interaction she had with me where she felt that almost closed energy from me that you might get from a
Mm.
manifester. And I really pondered it for a while, and I'm like, I feel like MGs feel like we have a lot on our shoulders because there's this unconscious, even if it's unconscious, there's this awareness that we do have something to accomplish in a way because we have this motor to throat and a sacral. And so there's a weird feeling of like, okay, I know I'm waiting to respond, but once I do, we're going to pop off. You know, things are going places. So yeah, it's interesting. And I feel like there's even the different flavors of, do you have an actual manifested channel, or are you an indirect MG? Because even they feel different. So, you know, we could just ponder on all the differences of all of us in so many directions.
I love how you said that, because that's exactly how I feel about my manifesting generators is, and I've said this to Rebeka, there's some that feel just like she described, like very bubbly and very like, whoa, this is awesome. And there's some that repel, like I feel like repelled by them. There's something about them that I don't like, and I can't figure it out, except that they're manifesting generators. Yeah. And so that's what I go with. But so at first I was like, so do I not like all manifesting generators? Like, what's happening? But it's really dependent on the person. But it's a very extreme feeling like that of like, whoa, this person is like a breath of fresh air, just like, or they're very sharp, like they're harsh. It's like too bright. It's like, I can't look at you. Get out of here. And I love that you said it like that, because for the pure generators, which also I think is kind of a weird term. I mean, I know it separates you guys a little bit easier, but pure makes it sound, I don't know. I can tell the difference.
Pure is just that they have sacral authority. So both their strategy and authority is in the sacral. So there's pure generator and emotional generator.
So generator is just, so there's pure generator who's non-emotional. Yeah. And there's, okay. Well, it still sounds weird to call them pure generators.
I think they would also say pure Manny gen if they had sacral authority.
Pure?
Yeah. Because like that pure, to me, it just feels like it's because both things are in that sacral. So
the sacral is pure and the rest of us are impure.
No, it's just that the strategy and authority for them is pure. Like it's one.
I know, but if you don't have that, then you're not pure.
I think the word pure in this regard is meant to mean only, right? So like when you say like a pure individual or purely collective, it's like only individual, only collective.
All right.
We all know that some of the words in human design are weird, and they're kind of their own thing in the system, you know?
I guess that's true. You're right.
But I get where you're coming from. It's kind of like that, I don't know, purity culture type thing comes into your mind of like, what's pure versus not?
What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, I have one of my good friends is an emotional Manny gen, and she hates it. She gets so annoyed by pure generator. She's like, I'm not worse than them. I'm like, no, that's not what they're saying.
Yeah.
But I get it.
It hits right there.
Yeah. It's like there's not that many ways to describe it. So I understand just needing like a succinct way to do that, you know?
Let's talk about your emotional authority, since we don't have that. And we'll get your opinion on this too. In the transits, the 36 has been defined for like a year and a half, maybe. I don't even know how long anymore. And I have 35. So I've been defined through the transits and through my husband, who is not an emotional definition, but we define each other. So I feel like I've been around emotional energy for a long time. Like it just is there, and I don't even notice it.
Okay, so you don't notice the difference of like how you feel when you're not emotionally defined?
I don't know. I don't know what that would feel like, because it's been in the transits for so long, and I've been with my husband and lived with him for 10 years. So I don't really, it like confuses me, but I don't feel emotionally defined. I just feel, and plus also this ties into your other thing, the trauma around emotions also kind of jacks up how I like what it's so confusing to me. The emotional energy for me is so confusing. I just pretend like it's not there. I don't know like I don't know when I feel it, when I don't feel it. Do I care? Like, is this mine? Is this not mine? Ooh, am I letting this go through? It's wave. I don't know. So I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah. Well, what do you guys want to know about it?
Well, I find it really fascinating, especially given that you have 3 channels going on. So there's, again, 3 other gates. So there's a lot happening in your emotional center. specifically. And I remember one time, this was a while back, you did a post about how you feel like the solar plexus is kind of like a rock tumbler, like it takes a while to move things through before you get that clarity, and it's like a shiny rock. And I've always felt that with my soundboarding authority as well. So um also the more recent post where you're doing something talking about uh there hasn't really been much information about the clarity in the emotional
Mhm.
system. Like, what does that even mean? And of course I can't define that. I don't have that defined. So I'm curious what you've learned about that. Like, sorry, I feel like this is really vague, but there's just so many questions about it. Like, what
Yeah.
does it feel like to go through the waves? And how has that process been for you to navigate it? And what does
Yeah.
clarity feel like?
Yeah, I feel like I'm so used to observing that process now that I have to look back to my life pre-human design and be like, well, how was I functioning back then? And back then, it was like I would feel this, now that I can recognize it as adrenalized pressure to take action, because you can see I have my root to my solar plexus and then my solar plexus to my throat. So there's this adrenalized pressure when I'm either in a high or in a low to take some sort of action to manifest something. So back then, I didn't know that I needed to wait for that to pass in order to see what I really needed to do. And being an emotional generator, I there's a sacral that's in there as well. Like, it's my sacral is also connected to my solar plexus. So I really have to be able to actually see what I have a response for. And when I'm getting tousled in the waves and feeling that pressure to take action, just do something right now, it can feel really overwhelming. And even that in and of itself is like super intense emotionally to go through that. So I look back at decisions that I used to make where I just like break up with a boyfriend and be like, I'm out of here, and literally initiate leaving the relationship, just being in a low, or quit a job. I just wouldn't show up to a job because I'd be like, I'm over that. I'm emotional today. I don't want to go. And my life was a dumpster fire. It's just thinking back at the challenges. Oh man, it's like hindsight's always 2020, but thankfully I found human design in 2017. So for the last 6 years, it's really been about watching how those waves kind of try to push me to do something. Um, and feeling when that's correct and when it's not, because that's something that I've really learned about my process is clarity doesn't feel like neutrality to me. And neutrality means I could take something or leave it. It means that I don't really have the energy for it. Neutrality is like, meh. So when I am a yes to something, my wave does move me to take an action, but there's a quality to that in my body that is very different than the like adrenalized nervous pressure that I used to feel.
Mhm. Wow, that's
Okay.
so cool.
I know. I loved that. Clarity doesn't feel like neutrality. Okay. That helps me because I feel like that's kind of what's in the literature where it's like, don't be in a high and a low, be in that middle space. So from the outside, I'm kind of identifying that as neutral, but that's
Mm.
Yeah.
Well,
And maybe it's a languaging thing because to me, the word neutral just feels like, but when I've
mhm.
actually made decisions that feel really aligned and they've been ease filled and I haven't been met with resistance, because that's how I can identify now whether a decision was from my authority or not, because it's really hard to kind of be like correct or incorrect. Because sometimes even when we make a decision from our authority, like stuff happens that is not ideal, right? I'm sure you two have experienced that where it's like, why was my authority a yes to this? But I have learned that when I'm making a decision from that emotional space, it ends up just being resistance. And when I make these, when I take action from that place of excitement and there's energy for it and I can feel that clear response, it just doesn't feel neutral. That word just doesn't work for me. I would say like a better word is confident, or maybe even comfort, um like feeling a comfort in making that decision, but there is energy there that's moving me to it.
Mhm. Look at
interesting.
you taking notes. She's like, yes.
Well, and I've talked to other emotionals about it too that have said sometimes when they've been riding their wave for a while, especially an emotional MG specifically here, when they've been riding their wave for a while, and then they're actually moved to make the decision. Sometimes it kind of is in a high, or it's like the wave is moving us, right? But there's a clarity and again, a confidence there instead of the flip flopping back and forth, because that's also something I notice when I'm like, well, I don't know. Well, maybe this, maybe that. And kind of like, it's almost like my mind is reacting to my wave and saying, I know, I don't know. I know, I don't know. And when I feel the confidence, it's just this, like, there's assuredness to it, even though my mind could still be like, but what about, there's that little maybe 10% that's not clear, because that's always going to be there. But yeah, I don't like the word neutrality.
Okay.
It's like you're surfing. It's like, am I on this wave? Am I getting on? Am I here? And then you're on it and you're on the high. Like you said, you're on the high, but you're like, I got it. I'm on this thing. I'm safe, sort of.
Yes.
I mean, if a shark comes by, I don't know, but
there's a much different frequency to it. I mean,
yeah, you could still be up there, like going and chugging along, but it still could be the right choice. I can see what you mean. Like it's kind of weird to try to force people to make a choice in a certain spot when they might be a little bit in the high or a little bit in the low. And who are you to be like, well, no, you have to wait until you're right here in this little square of being. But I like how you said it feels different, because you can be in the high adrenalized from your root, like, or you can be in the high, like, I got it. I'm on the wave.
Yeah. And I think it's so, and this is why he's a mentor that's now turned into a friend, and now we're collaborating together. My friend James Alexander and I are teaching a course about this, because we're like, there's really nothing out there that's guiding people to their own yes as an emotional authority and what that feels like from a somatic based perspective. There's just kind of this canned advice that's thrown out there, but what does it actually feel like to you? Because I can tell people what a yes feels like to me and what a no feels like and what that nervousness feels like in my body. But I feel like people really need to go through the process of learning that for themselves. And that can take a while, and it can take a lot of awareness and, a lot of journaling and kind of paying attention to that. And, just being really present with your body, honestly, because I would never tell another emotional, well, that's a no for you and that's a yes for you. Only they can know that. And it's just, there's so many flavors of the solar plexus. And I think the channels that we have is going to be dependent on that too. So yeah, really, people have to be really willing just to go inwards, like everything else in human design, and be really curious about their own process.
Absolutely. And I find it interesting too. So I'm just curious if I can reflect back to you, like what I've observed and what I tell clients, and so we can see if I'm on the right track. But when I have an emotional person, like recently I did a reading with someone who's emotional defined, and I think she just had the 59-6. Anyway, it was all body. So there was no connection to the throat. And so she felt like she would get really annoyed when her boyfriend would ask her to like talk through the feelings. She's like, I don't want to, I just need to feel it. It's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. That's in your body. And then her boyfriend's chart, he had the 1222. So she's like, he always wants to talk about his feelings. Like, well, of course he does. Because how he releases it, he's got to talk about it to release it. And you have to feel it to release it. You have nothing, like not even any gates reaching out in between those two. So it just made sense that there would be that difference in the emotional processing. Does that seem correct?
Yeah, you're totally right with that. And that's definitely something I can speak to, because my husband is also an emotional MG, but has no solar plexus to throat. He has the 3740 and the 659. And he's single definition. So it makes its way there eventually, but right, it's not direct like mine is. With the 1222, when we're processing emotions, especially if we're feeling open and feeling like it wants to come out, we can really articulate how we're feeling. And that's something I've always kind of taken for granted until being in relationship with my husband, because he just kind of shuts down when he's feeling super emotional, and all he needs is touch and like validation that I'm there with him. And sometimes reflection back to him, but most of the time all he needs is like touch and just to move through it, just to allow it to move itself through. And I used to be like, why don't you talk to me? Why don't you tell me what's going on? Because he almost just can't even talk. Like it's so overwhelming in his body. He kind of just shuts down. And now I see that for what it is, and I don't see it as a problem at all. Whereas before I used to think there was a problem with it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and I've noticed so both of my kids are emotional authority. My youngest has the 1222 and my oldest is a projector. And he has the 5539 and the 3740. So it's been interesting seeing the difference with that, and listening to you talk about some of your emotional stuff has helped me to understand my kid. Like, he's just graduated. It was interesting going through the whole college application process. Like, he took forever to make any decision on anything. And I think before I would have been very nervous. Like, you got to make decisions. Like, how are you going to be a responsible adult? But now, like, he just has to sit with things for a little bit. So I'm curious, like, for you, I don't know how difficult it is for you to separate like those channels that you have, but if you could support like little you with that 3955, what do you wish your mom would have done, or like some kind of support you would have had?
yeah. It's really interesting. My dad's a psychologist and specializes in children. He's worked with a lot of children. And then my mom is a projector, and she's always been really into, meditation and Tai Chi and spirituality and those kinds of things. So she was kind of awake and aware just in her own way. And growing up, I got these like I got parented two different ways. My mom seemed very attuned to me as a projector, very attuned to my process and aware of what I needed. And even though it wasn't always perfect, like she just seemed to know most of the time. Whereas my dad, he would try different things like, oh, I read this in a book, or like there's a study about this, and like this is the way we got to go about it. And it's funny because now talking to him about it, I remember there was a distinct turning point in my childhood where he realized that everything he read in the books wasn't going to work on me. And he just started validating and holding space and being there for me, because he started learning that my whole thing was I would scream and I'd get really angry and run away and slam my door and cause a big scene. But the thing is that I wanted somebody to follow me. And so I would put on this big show because I just wanted somebody to follow me and to be there for me and not tell me that it was wrong the way I was feeling, even if it was completely irrational and illogical and I was being a brat. Because sometimes I was, sometimes I was just like, I want this and I want my way and that's not going to happen. And, and looking back, I can see that. But through a child's lens, they don't know that they're like being completely unreasonable, right? They have a request, they want it met. So yeah, I would throw this big tantrum and have a big to do. And I would always want my mom, because she would come in and just, she's an emotional projector. She has a tribal wave. She would come in and just like stroke my head and listen to me cry and be like, yeah, I can see that you're really feeling angry right now. It sucks when we don't get our way, and like validate that. But it took both of them some time to really get in the groove with me in that way. So I think my mom just probably picked it up a little quicker than my dad, because he had to go through all of his he has 6124 and he's very left. So he had to go through all of his mental processes around it. And yeah, pretty interesting. So yeah, I would say just that's a roundabout way to come back to the answer, that I feel like attunement to the child and just validation is like really all I needed. It was actually really simple at the end of the day. And it's just so funny hearing my dad talk about it now, because he's like, man, you put me through the ringer. And I just realized all you needed was for me to sit there with you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm still the same to this day.
Like, literally, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And it's like, I know, like, even if I am being ridiculous, there just needs to be that validation, because as a child getting thrown into that emotional process, it's like you see red and you're just being tousled in the waves. And for me, there kind of was this awareness of you're being ridiculous right now, or I don't know. There was always that little bit of awareness kind of watching, but I couldn't control it. And even now, sometimes with my husband, I'll say, oof, my child self is really present. And I'm just telling you right now, like, it's almost like I can hop in and out of awareness and into my child self being like, I'm not going to make any sense. I can't listen to you right now. Like, we need to have this conversation later because my child self is running the show.
That is great awareness.
Oof, it's taken a while. It's taken a while to get there.
Do you have kids or want kids?
I don't have them. I feel like it's the type of thing for me I'll never feel sure of because I'm so fickle. It's like in my design to be fickle, right? My husband's like he's sure he wants to be a dad, but he's also like, if you're not sure, then it's not going to happen. So whatever. He seemed pretty surrendered to that now. But I would say I'm curious about what it would be like to have a kid and have human design awareness and raise them through that lens. So we'll see. I always joke, like, I'm not religious at all, by the way, but I'm always like, it's in the Lord's hands. I don't know. 'Cause I kind of think it's one of those things you can't control at the end of the day. I mean, obviously you can, like, you can lower the probability of it, but I have a niece who my sister-in-law was on birth control a whole 9 yards, and my niece is a manifester, and she was coming into this world and she was coming through that birth control and did not care. So sometimes I'm like, I don't know, do we even have control of that, or is it just kind of a no choice type thing?
Right. Well, just given my experience, I feel like it's a no choice thing. Motherhood just kind of happened to me. But my first one is that emotional projector and just kind of popped in. But then, like, as soon as my first kid was born, I knew a second one was coming, and my second kid is
Mm.
manifester. So I think he was like, just get ready.
Bracing you for impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's refreshing to hear because I feel like I get that a lot. My husband and I both have 659. So, there is
They're
kind
like,
of
you
that
have to have
potential.
kids. You
I
don't
know
have a choice.
it's funny. I wonder if it's because I'm a second line and I'm like projecting that out, and I know that we can read the 659 as it doesn't need to be actual children that are being born. It can be creative projects and stuff like that. But I feel like to just, people around me, they feel that fertility in me and they just register it as you should have a kid. So I get it all the time. And my husband's very tribal. He has 2145, 3740, 659. So he's like, yeah, all about the tribe. Let's go,
That's so funny. Yeah, I'm a dog mom only.
Yeah.
My husband and I, well, I was the one who told him, like, before we got married, I was like, I don't want to do that. And he goes, okay, but if you change your mind, I'm cool with it. And I'd have to check back in with him. And every once in a while, I'll be like, hey, I'm serious. And then when he proposed to me, I was like, I'm fucking serious, right? Because my thing was like, if you really want a kid and you're not saying it, like, that's a big deal. Like, we have to communicate on that. And he was like, no, but I think he thought I was going to change my mind. And he was like, just leaving it open in case that's what was going to happen. And I was like, no, actually, I want a kid less and less every day that goes by. So, and I have the 6. I was checking to see if he has the 59 because I always forget I don't know why I always forget what his chart looks like.
Because we're looking at other people's charts all day. We just blank on the people that are actually conditioning
he's
us.
He's really open. He's just spleen, sacral, heart. I call him my caveman because that's to me what that energy feels like. It's
totally
like very survival and old school. And so no, he doesn't have the 59. No, he didn't. Okay. But I just think that it's interesting because we've talked about this, Rebeka and I have talked about this, how, like, being a parent, not being a parent, how people have opinions on that based on your design and how that's not really relevant.
I think that's so weird.
It's just going to go a certain way depending on your type. Like, if you're a parent, well, and you're a projector, it's going to go this way, or it's kind of this way. If you're a manifestor, it might go this way, but it doesn't mean you can or shouldn't, or I don't know. Totally. I feel like sometimes they tell projectors, like, it's going to be bad for you, like, physically and energetically, to have a kid. Like, it's going to mess up this whole thing for you.
I feel like sometimes Ra will say like one thing in a random lecture and then people take that out of context and run with it. And I feel like I've heard him say, ideally projectors don't have kids. I don't want to quote him, but something along those lines of
Oh,
like,
yeah.
if in a perfect world you wouldn't. But I'm just like, it's one of those maybe genius freak things he just blurts out there that like
51
maybe
gauge
doesn't have
shock.
it doesn't have a lot of substantiation to it. Because I mean, one of my clients is I think she's a triple split projector. Her only open center is her sacral and it's completely open. And she has 10 kids.
My gosh.
And she's an amazing, I mean, I don't really know if she's a good parent, but like from what I can see, like she teaches people how to do home birth. And it's like, that's her mastery is the sacral. And to me, it makes perfect sense when I see her design. And so it's just like, how can you look at somebody and be like, that's wrong? That shouldn't be your life.
My sister is a triple split emotional projector and she has 2 kids.
There you go.
Maybe it's the triple split. I don't know.
Maybe because they have more motors, maybe.
Yeah, but she's open. She's undefined roots, spleen, and sacral. But she's got the heart, solar plexus, the throat, G center, and the head. It just seems like a weird. I know triple splits are always kind of like, but this one, I always look at her chart. I'm like, this makes sense why you are so insane. Because she was always growing up, she was always very aggressive. And like, if she got upset, she was breaking things and throwing things and trying to fight people and like and when I got upset, I was like, no one talk to me. Don't look at me. I'm going to go in my room, be by myself, and I'll come out and everything will be fine. Leave me alone. But she was like tornado. And then when I saw she was projector, I was like, this doesn't make sense. She shouldn't be like, projector doesn't make sense. And then I looked at it, I was like, actually, it really does.
So many flavors to the projector, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's so true.
That's the interesting part for me, and why, like, sometimes I like reading those like mantras for projector or whatever, but I personally cannot do that because it drives me nuts. Like, there's so much nuance. And then even like you were saying before, there's nuance inside of the Manigen. There's nuance inside of all of it. And so it just like drives me crazy. The thing, like, even just we were just talking about, like, projectors shouldn't be parents. Like, do you know how many different kinds of projectors there are? Like, what are you even talking?
Lots and lots.
Yeah.
And I mean, even, I don't know, I've seen reflectors be amazing parents, it's just like, you can't say one type just because you don't have motors or just because whatever reason, life doesn't work that way. I think sometimes it's fifth lines trying to universalize things that cannot be universalized, I've noticed.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of like a shadow of the fifth line, I guess, is when they're trying to universalize something that
and there's a lot of 3-5s out there who are probably, like you said, experimenting with trying to universalize a bunch of stuff. This. Oh, this one sticks. Oh, this one does. But
yeah, totally.
But when you put it out there, the rest of us are like, hey, we don't know that you're just throwing a bunch of shit out here. We are taking everything you say at face value. So quit experimenting with your universalizations. No, don't, because that's probably what you're supposed to do. But
I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but just the deeper you get into your process, the less you can take in just outer authority in general. Like, you just become very specific about what you can take in. And because to me now, I can't help but see how most people are teaching from their designs. I mean, everybody really. And when you don't know somebody's design and you're like, does this apply to me? I don't know. Because it's happened so many times where I've like listened to somebody speak and then somehow I get their design and I'm like, oh, I can see why they're saying it. It makes sense for them, but this actually doesn't apply to me.
Yes. And I used to read like self-help books all the time for pre-human design, right? Like figuring out what's wrong with me.
Same.
Now I can't at all. Like, they're talking about something, I'm like, this guy clearly has a defined heart. Like, this is not gonna work. And I just can't anymore.
Yeah, it's more just entertaining.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because we are outer authority as mental projectors. So it's almost and we've talked about this before, we're designed to be conditioned. We're designed to come in contact with the other, with different environments. So a lot of times we're relying on so much outside stuff that it's really difficult to know what's for you and what's not for you, what's yours and what's not yours, because we're designed to be connected in that sort of way. And we should anyway rely on something outside of ourselves to help us make choices. And that is a really difficult thing to wrap your head around and still feel like you're an individual and that you're in charge of your own life sometimes. And like you said, it can make it really hard to deal with people when you know what they are energetically or what they're bringing to the table energetically, even if you don't know their type, and you're like, this is a lot or a little. And there's times when I'm like, I would normally let this person keep talking or keep being around me, but like, I don't like this. I'm just going to put this away now. But it can be hard for us. Well, I shouldn't talk for you, but for me as a mental projector, it's going to be hard sometimes to know what is mine and what is not mine, in all the centers, not just like emotional energy, all of the energy. Like, sometimes I'm like, is this me? Is this these other people? Is this place that I'm in? Has this been hanging out around for a while and I didn't notice it till now? Like, I don't know. Sometimes I just feel like we're a big mystery floating around.
Totally. And I feel the thing is this is just what I've observed with mental projectors, because I lived with one for 3 years. I was in a very close relationship with her. You're still going to do what you want to do. You're still going to do what you're moved to do. It's just that you kind of rely on the motors or the design of other people to help you kind of express that and see that. At least that's what I would watch. It would be like she lived with my husband and I for a little while. So he'd always come to me like, why does she keep asking me for advice when she goes and does the opposite? Or why does she always want to know what I would do in this situation? And I'm like, that's just how she is. And this is before I even knew about design. And I'm like, she just needs to talk it out with you. She just wants to know what you would do. Just who cares if she doesn't go do what you would do?
That's really interesting
because
I do the same thing. And I used to think I was relying too heavily on other people. Like, I wasn't soundboarding right. Like, because I was like, hey, I actually do want you to tell me what you think. Oh, but I'm not supposed to want that. So no, never mind. Don't tell me what you think. But it's interesting that you put it that way, because I very much want to hear what someone thinks, but not at all in a way that's like, tell me what to do or give me a way to go. It's more, tell me what you would do, because I don't want to do what you would do. I'm pretty sure I don't want to do that. So what would you do? I'll do the other thing.
Which could totally make sense if the person is like a very different design, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. That's probably what she was doing. She's like, what would you do? Oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this. But now I feel better asking people their opinions and for advice, because it really does feel like when I ask people for that stuff, I really am not intending to do it at all. And I don't even think about how that could be annoying for, like, I don't even think about that. I'm like, you're just sharing information with me. You don't care what I do with it, right? I guess they do. They want you to take their advice. But for Sean, it's easier now, because I'm just like, hey, just tell me what you would do. And he'll just say it, and he knows I'm just going to do whatever I want to do.
Yeah.
But now I feel better. Oh, I like that.
I just kind of see it as like data collection. And honestly, it's really similar to the emotional process in that way, where it's like, for me, I kind of do need to soundboard with people like that, but it's more of just me expressing myself and getting the feelings out and kind of hearing what they have to say about it. And then I'm collecting data, moving along my wave. So I feel like once I got that, because I did live with her for a while knowing human design, and it just made things so much easier, because I just knew, oh, she's not actually asking for my advice. She's kind of just looking for a space to process what she's moving through and have something reflected to her in a way.
Yeah.
So
a list of choices that humans might make, but I'm not going to make any of those.
Totally.
It is an interesting thing. Well, it's taken me a while to figure out the soundboarding, because my whole birth family, both my parents and my brother, are all guilt motivation. My ex-husband and my oldest son are guilt motivation. And so, like, I felt like people were always trying to fix me. Like, I always had this sense that I needed to
dang.
Right. But then, like, when I would talk, they would just give me these answers, or like, my ex-husband used to like write out things that I needed to do. And like and I would get pissed and then he wouldn't understand why I was so mad. I'm like, I don't want you to fix me. I just want you to listen to me. And he's like, but anyway, it was like a whole thing. So it took me a while to realize it wasn't selfish of me to just talk out loud.
Yeah.
And
not at all.
they would have to work really hard to not want to fix you too. Like the guilt motivation is that's a swinger,
Well,
man.
that's why I just
They
stopped
always
soundboarding.
want to fix,
Yeah,
just unconscious.
yeah. I don't
Yeah.
soundboard with any of them now, which was like had to go through a grief process for me because like they don't actually see me, and that's kind of weird. Like they're not seeing me, and I have to be okay with that, and I just have to like step back and not have the relationship that I would really like to have
Oh, I
because
like that you said that.
they're not
That's
going to.
that's really beautiful that you said that. Like
Yeah.
that they don't see you, but you still like you're okay with it. I mean, you're okay as you can be
Yeah,
because you know it's mechanics, but it's still. I like that you said that.
yeah. It's shifted a lot of things. It's helped a lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, the acceptance process there can be grief in that, right? So it's like when you know somebody's design, like my dad is also guilt motivation, and I know to not go to him with my big decisions because he's going to like recommend a pros and cons list and me being really mental about it. And he doesn't understand that that's not how I function. And so it's coming from the goodness of his heart because that's how he would make a decision, but it's not what's best for me. And so it is kind of sad when you're like, oh, I wish I could go to this person because I love them and I respect them and whatever, but it's just not correct for me to get their outer authority, unless I need a practical action oriented solution about this specific thing, like
I must act on this, so help me.
when my toilet breaks, my dad is like, I got you, action, solution, and I'm like, thank you, thank goodness. So there are those moments, but it's like, I know that if I'm working through something that's going to be a big decision and it's emotional, like I got to go to my mom for that because she's a projector and she's just going to guide me to my authority and be able to kind of go through all the feelings with me and all of that. So yeah, different strokes for different folks,
Yeah.
And we're all conditioned to have the process of your dad, like to look at a problem as logical as we can, pros and cons, like we're all conditioned to make choices that way. And if you don't make choices that way, you're not doing it right. Like you're using your heart over your head, or you're doing it wrong somehow. And it's kind of interesting because even people who have processes like that and who are very left or very head heavy, this is still not where we make choices. So you have to come down here. Rebeka and I were talking about it the other day. It's like we're scuba divers and we swim down into the body, but we can't stay down there very long. We have to come back up and breathe up here in our heads because this is where, well, not our crowns, but like ajna throat, where we're defined. But that doesn't feel like, for me, it doesn't feel safe because I think of my survival view in caves and all that stuff, to be down here very long. And so I feel like we have to swim down there, and the other types who are all body probably feel similar to like, well, I have to climb up into the crown and the ajna and the throat, and that feels weird. So now I have to come back down. And we're just all experimenting with the parts of us that are undefined and are so open because it's fun, but it's scary. I think that's how I describe everything. That's probably going to be like my epitaph: fun, but scary.
The truth of that, the third line truth of that, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I guess. I say stuff and then I'm like, oh, I guess that's what that's. Because my third line bugs me a lot because it's a mess and it just feels very blindfolded and just like, what's happening? But I also see how I do it unconsciously all of the time and how I speak in that way of like experiment. So yeah. I wanted to make sure we touch on, because I thought this was super interesting when you put it in like your stuff of what you want to talk about how strategy and authority is super important. Yeah, we know it's the answer to all of our problems and questions. But there's things that play into that are different for everybody because of how we grew up, right? Is that kind of where you're going with it?
Yeah, I think it's just important for some people and not all, right? Because some people just hook into strategy and authority and they're like, this is it. This is all I need. But I wasn't one of those people. And I've talked to tons of people at this point that also had that same experience where if you are still holding, pain or trauma, whatever you want to call it, because I know there's like trauma with a capital T, and then there's the word that is being tossed around a lot as trauma these days, which I could also just call like pain and suffering. Because I do think there's a difference between having like CPTSD and having pain that you experienced as a child. But either or, I think a lot of us, at least when I first came to design, I didn't really understand what that would even mean to follow my body because I was so dissociated at the time. Like I was drinking a lot and I was kind of in the throes of an eating disorder. And I was used to, because of my eating disorder that I had since I was like 13, I was used to going against the cues of my body. And so it wasn't natural for me to actually listen to my body and go with it. In fact, that was actively going against what I would call my disease, right? So I actually needed to do like a lot of somatic work and body scan type work and work with a somatic counselor to get me to that space of really trusting my body and not seeing my body as the enemy. And that's very specific to me and what was going on with me. But I've just worked with so many clients at this point who are like, I can't even feel my body. Like when you say, oh, what does that sensation in your body feel like? I can't tell you, which is data in and of itself that you can't feel anything. Okay, that's numbness, right? But I don't know. I think it's just oversimplified to say, hey, strategy and authority is all you need. And at the same time, it's sometimes like a chicken or the egg, because I'm like, well, my strategy and authority kind of led me to this somatic counselor or like this practice or whatever. So it's like, who really knows what any of it is? But I'll say I didn't have a conscious awareness of my body is guiding me to this and this is what's happening. It was just kind of like, and then especially in relational type settings, when we're like, I notice my trauma comes up with other people more than anything. And so when I'm in a relationship with somebody or, any kind of relationship, whether it be a working relationship or romantic, whatever, that's where your stuff is going to come up. And even if your authority is like guiding you to one thing, that might not be what's coming out of your mouth. It's like, there's just there's a lot of complexities to that. So I would say, to sum it up, some people need a certain amount of like pre-deconditioning before they really feel solid in entering into their experiment and like, yeah, I want to do this thing. And there needs to be some gentleness and some grace around that. And it makes sense when you listen to Raw talk, because he's desire, motivation, and he's personal view, and strategy and authority is what he locked into. And so like hearing Raw and knowing his design, it's a lot easier to kind of like accept his outer authority and see why that's what he was preaching. And that's why he was locked into that. And also give you room to explore your own process and see, okay, maybe that's all Raw needed. And maybe I do see a lot of value in strategy and authority, but do I need other tools? Do I need other support? Do I need different awareness that's aside from just follow your strategy and authority?
Yeah, I love that. My husband's desire too, and probability view.
Oh, that's fun.
So I feel I understand what you mean, and he's sacral, so it's like, okay, good, you got it. But it is, and when you're talking about not knowing how it feels in the body, I mean, when you have no body definition, I've said that growing up when people would say, listen to your gut, trust your gut. I would literally say, what does that mean? What is that? And people go, oh, your gut, you feel like a kick or a punch or a thing or a blah. And I was like, okay, but then this talks too at the same time and is louder. So when you listen to this doesn't mean anything. It's telling you lies. It maybe your stomach hurts, maybe, I don't know. So it was very weird to me growing up, because when people would say like those types of things, I was like, this doesn't, it literally doesn't make any sense. So
Mm.
quit saying that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think just knowing about like fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses and how those are survival responses that, you know, for somebody who's splenic authority, maybe like a flight response would make sense, right? But there's sometimes where I'm like, oh, I am in full on fawn mode right now because that's my response usually in a trauma situation. And I actually can't listen to my authority because I'm in this soup of like, I just need to fawn and so I can feel safe, you know, and like safety is all that matters. But if I was being really honest with myself, I'd want to tell this person how I really feel or whatever, and not go into that fawn response. And so if I didn't know that about myself, I would just keep thinking like, oh, I'm in my not self. I'm in my not self all of the time and not give it the awareness that it needed and like the patience and support. And then I would just be down on myself of like, oh, I can't live my design. I can't follow strategy and authority. And that's the theme that kind of kept coming up with my clients was like, I'm like trying so hard to do this, but I feel like I can't do it. And I'm like, yeah, well, like, let's look at all these responses versus what human design is telling you and kind of just take a break from that for a minute. And then that's kind of where like parts work has come in for me and being really helpful. Because I think no matter what your design is, like just humans in general, there's so much complexity to our psyche and we have so many parts of ourselves that exist in our mind. And so can we start to identify what those different parts are and how sometimes they're driving the bus versus your authority actually making an aligned decision? And, you know, why is that part of yourself super loud and at the forefront instead of you being able to truly connect into your authority and like what's really true for you?
I think that's really important to talk about. And it was hitting me like this feels especially important for mental projectors with all of our openness, like Janelle was saying. But then I love that you are the one bringing this up because you have so much definition. And from what I've experienced, there's kind of this idea that like, oh, well, you get conditioned in your open centers, but not in your defined centers. But you can most definitely be conditioned through your defined centers. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, what has been, I don't know if this is too vague, but what has been your experience with that? Like, you have so much definition, but you still have had so much to work through.
Yeah. You know, the best way that I've been able to make sense of it is your openness can distort your definition. So that's kind of how I look at it. It's not necessarily like I'm taking in conditioning in the same way where I'm like receptive to something there. It's more of like my openness plays a role in having distortion. And openness could be anywhere in the chart, not just your open centers, right? It could be any of your open gates or channels. But yeah, so the way I've seen it play out for myself, my open ego obviously plays like a huge role in this. And, you know, feeling like I need to belong or like I'm going to get kicked out of the tribe. I have a lot of individual circuitry. And so there is that pain around feeling like I don't belong and like my survival depends on being good with the tribe. And, yeah, so that's where I notice a lot of it coming in like, oh, if my open ego is like hijacking or distorting my G center, for example, then I'm not going to be able to follow my own direction or it's going to be fuzzy. And like a great example of this for me is like drinking, because I worked in the restaurant industry for 15 years. I still do a couple days a week and it's a huge part of the culture. And when I first started deconditioning, I first started kind of seeing, I don't really want alcohol. I don't like, that's not something that I want. And our G center is connected to our liver. And so it made sense because I was trying to feel into my direction, feel into my identity, actually see who I am. And then you start drinking on top of that and it makes it fuzzy and it like disconnects you from your G center. But because I wanted to belong and I wanted to get along with my coworkers or whatever, I would still find myself drinking, even though my authority was a no to it. Like I'd be actively a no to something and still doing it because my open ego is like, but you need to belong. And this is how you belong with people, you know? So I think there's a lot of different ways you could look at it in a chart, but most of the time it's just seeing how either like hanging gates that are pointing at an open center or the open or undefined center, how that is distorting your definition. And I mean, we could also go as deep as seeing how like your view and your motivation and transference and whatnot can also distort that. So
yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, because that made a lot of sense with that wide open ego.
yeah, I think it's just almost easier to see where it's coming from for me because, the way I like to think about the openness for you two, because there's so many open centers, is your not self is just kind of slippery and it's harder to pin down. Right. So, because it's kind of moving through all of those centers, it doesn't mean that you have more of a not self than I do. We all have the same potential for a big old not self. For me, it's just really obvious where it's coming from because it's concentrated to those two centers. So yeah, it's like, it just for you, it's probably harder to pin down. This is exactly where it's coming from, but you still know it's there.
Sometimes all 7 of them yell at the same time.
Yeah,
I could
they
see that.
usually don't come from, you're right. I don't know where they come from, but I feel like a lot of times it bounces around because your mind says this stars in the show, and then the other pieces are like, but this.
Yeah, it feels like you have like a board of directors that are all drunk or something.
Yeah, that are just yelling at you, and you're like, come on.
Yeah.
In my mind, the not self is a super dramatic teenage girl, like totally upset that her dress isn't perfect for the prom. And that just really helps me navigate it in a better
I
way.
love that. That's amazing. See, through a parts work lens, I'd be so curious about that part of you though, and be like, oh, what's her name? And what is she like?
They all sound different to me. They're all different. Like
Mhm.
we've talked about this. The root feels like somebody's behind me, pushing me. Like a mean man voice. Like I see like a dude who smokes cigarettes, so his suit just smells like cigarettes, and he seems mean, and he's got like a hat like this, and he's just going go.
I love that. See, I
And the
think it
other ones are different.
helps.
He's the meanest one.
Well, there you go. He's the loudest one for you right now. I feel like it
He's not
helps
the
to see it
loudest.
that
He's
yet.
the meanest. This is
Oh,
always the loudest. He's
okay.
mean. He's not nice. All the other ones can get me sometimes by being nice and like trying to get me. Just like you said, we got to fit in. We got to do this stuff. Like you can, like that stuff to me feels nice, but the root is like, hey, asshole,
pushy.
You need to do this now because you are a lazy person. And if you don't do this now, you suck at life. So you just might as well die. Like that's the root. Everybody else is like, hey, come on.
That's interesting. See, I get that voice too, but I attribute it to my ego because it's like, prove your value. You're worthless. What are you doing? So I'm like, this is where like I look at parts work and I'm like, okay, I have like this inner critic that has all these different flavors, and I just kind of call it that at this point because I'm just like, I don't know. It's there's so many voices coming through at once.
Yeah. The awareness is so cool though.
The awareness helps, and like personalizing each center has been what's helped me so much, and I'll tell people to do that too. They always crack up. But
I don't think I do it on purpose. It's like a very unconscious thing. I think it's inner vision. I put them like up here. I'm like, oh, it's this thing talking. And the my crown is not a voice. It's like a ticker that just has words that just keep going and going and going. It doesn't have a voice. So it's loud, but not in like a voice that I can, like any voice that I could articulate in my mind as loud. It's loud in the way that it's first. It's always first. But it's not, it has no sound. Is that weird?
That makes sense to me. No, that makes sense to me. Because like, if you think about it, the crown isn't conceptualization. It's just pure mental pressure. So yeah, words or whatever, like just popping in, that totally makes sense to me. But then it's
Times Square, like that thing that goes across, that's exactly what it is.
That's a really good.
Sometimes there's videos playing above it. I'm fucking
it's
TRL.
Just there's randomness. Yeah, I think that really speaks to the randomness of the crown, is like it could just be whatever pops in.
Yeah.
And then it sometimes makes its way down to the ajna to be conceptualized. But
Ugh.
that's where like you start deconditioning that. And it's like, I don't want to conceptualize that. I don't want to think about that. That was just some intrusive thing that popped in. And
Yeah,
like, I
I'm
don't
trying to get it.
care.
I'm like, get out of here. Go that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really funny. And
Yeah.
and I think it looks different for all of us depending on our design, but also, like you said, depending on our conditioning as kids. I think it's interesting because I think that strategy and authority require a certain amount of trust, and a lot of people's messy conditioning from childhood, it revolves around trust. So I think when you're talking about like needing some like warm up before you get to the strategy and authority, I think a lot of it has to do with we don't trust it. Like, I don't trust that strategy and authority is going to do what you say it's going to do.
Yeah.
And this is me talking, like, I'm not making this up. Like,
Yeah.
I don't trust that it's going to do what it says it's going to do. So I don't do it. I mean, I do it, but I don't think I do it as much as, I don't know. It feels very, we've talked about this where I feel like very on the fence with like my process. And sometimes I feel like I started it, and sometimes I'm like, I don't think I have. I really don't think that I have. And so it's like, it goes back and forth a lot. And it has a lot to do with trust. My parents were alcoholics, so I have like a whole bunch of weird shit when it comes to trust.
Yeah.
But like, ultimately, when you talk about trust, you're talking about trusting in yourself. Like, pretty much all the time when you talk about trust, you're talking about trusting yourself. And that's why it's like, that's weird. Like, I trust my husband, and I'm like, I'm so proud of myself. I trust him so much. Like, I look at me, I'm trusting. I'm so trusting. Look at, I'm strong in my trust, but then I turn it and it's like, nope. It's just this guy because he has proven time and time and again that I can. But I don't know if I can say that about myself. Whoa.
And I think extra hard for us with the mental projector stuff.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of variable and nuance in there, so that makes sense. And it's nice, it's really great that you have Sean and that he's been such a source of support for you, because
he's not doing it right either. Like, neither of us are doing it right. Like, life, we're doing it all wrongs. Not
What's
all
right
wrongs,
and wrong?
but like, I know, but it feels very much like we're both, especially at this moment, like really bumping into shit and just really being like, oh, I don't like, what are we doing? And so it's been real weird, but he has this, and it can be human designed, it could be not, but he has this thing that feels very much like, no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. And he just like gives that to me sometimes. I credit it to his 2-4. I credit it to his sacral. I credit it to a lot of human design things, but I don't know if that's what it is.
Yeah.
I just assume.
There's that steadiness to him.
Yeah. Even though like, I when I point things out logically, I'm like, do you see though how this might not go that way? He's like, yeah. I'm like,
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense though, because as a mental projector, you're really conditioned by your environment and who you're around. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. Like, it
No,
seems
I
like
know.
this is like healthy conditioning of like, he has that
Hopefully.
self-assuredness, probably because sacral, spleen, I think you said heart too. He has his
Yeah,
defined,
yeah. Caveman.
Those are all very like sure, like
cross of
feelings
rulership.
of grounded. Yeah, right. There's like a grounded self-assuredness there, and you get to kind of take that on and be on that ride with him.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe it doesn't always feel like it's yours, but to be able to depend on it outside of you is like a really good practice space to be able to depend on it within you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I can't believe I didn't cry till the end. Are you so proud of me, Rebeka?
Oh,
I'm a faucet, basically.
I love it.
It's like Vanessa said, like, it's a beautiful quality. And then I felt bad. I don't think I ever told you this, so I'm just gonna tell you this publicly right now. Like, seeing Vanessa just like adore your reaction to life right here, like how you do just kind of.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, I'm talking to you.
Oh.
Like, it made me realize that I just kind of took it for granted. I'm just like, oh, that's Janelle. Like, she's just.
Oh.
What, this?
Yes,
Craziness.
the way Vanessa was like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. Like it really is. So I wanted to reiterate
Thanks. It doesn't feel beautiful, but I appreciate it. I'm used to it now because it's been my whole life. I'm not a confrontation person. Everything makes me cry. Good, happy things, sad things, all of it is just out of my face. And then as you see, I'm very animated with my face. So it's like, and I was super self-conscious growing up, super self-conscious. I didn't want anyone to ever see me cry because I was like, this is just horrendous. And I'm cool. I'm fine with it now because it just happens. So I don't really have a choice. But it's still sometimes I'm like, this is too much for you to see.
I love it. I mean, I'm obviously you guys aren't watching me throughout my house all day, but like don't think I could count how many times I cry. Like at anything. Like my dog could just like look really cute and I'm like, I start crying. So yeah, I feel you on that.
I was working the other night and this family was singing happy birthday. I wait tables too for like 25 years. So
so we're in the same kind of boat there.
I hate it. And they were singing happy birthday and it was a Spanish song. It wasn't happy birthday in Spanish because I know that. It was a different song. And so they started to sing it and I stopped and I listened to them and I watched them. I was going to go do something else, but I was like, I haven't heard this song. And the whole family sang it and it was really pretty. And they all looked at me and they're like, are you okay? Because I was crying. And I was like, yeah, this was just a really pretty song. I'll be right back with you. And I like ran away. Because it was like, there was this older woman and they were all sitting there singing to her and smiling. And I was just thinking about the whole moment. And I don't think they realized that that's what I was doing. And I ran into the kitchen and I'm like, guys, what's the song that they sing for birthdays? It's not happy birthday. There's another song. What is it? And all the kitchen guys started singing it. And I started crying again.
Oh, was it like, Spanish?
Yeah. And I don't know the song. And they were like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, they were singing it. I was trying to explain it, but I was like, I know this sounds insane.
No, that would totally make me cry.
It was cute.
Especially if it was for like elderly people.
But if they were just singing regular happy birthday, I'd have been like, bye. And I would just walk away. But for some reason, it was the fact that I didn't know the words and that it wasn't happy birthday. Because I know happy birthday in Spanish because I sing that. But this, I was like, I don't know this one. And
it's a new experience.
Yeah. And it's not, and I was like, I don't know these words. I don't know what's happening. It was very neat, but everybody else was like, Janelle, what's wrong with you? And then people come in with their babies and I can't. Like people I work with come in with their babies, like little babies, children. Well, I don't want you. But if they come in with like a tiny infant, one of our valets did this one time. I knew he had been trying to have a baby with his wife for a while and he was a super cool, nice guy. And when she got pregnant, I was like excited for him, even though I don't care about kids. And he brought the baby in and it was like tiny and I lost it. I lost my shit. And everybody was like, it's because you want babies. I was like, definitely not. I know that he really wanted a kid, like, and this is really special for him. Like, that is why this little tiny human, I don't give a shit about. So I think I just
the whole experience
I really connect with people's experiences and I feel like I feel them like right in here.
Totally.
And, like we're having it together, even though I don't want to like hijack their experience. It just is like, I don't have a choice. It's happening.
Oh, I love it.
Well, thanks. And thanks for coming on. This has been a really cool conversation. And we don't really ever get to talk to sacral beings, really.
Yeah.
So thanks.
It was so fun. It was so fun getting to know you two and just sharing this intimate space together. You know, my 659 is like, let's get intimate. So I'm glad that we kind of got into some like deep stuff and yeah, it was fun.
It was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I was so honored when you asked.
Good. Why don't you tell people where to find you so that they know? Because we like you and we want them to find you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love working with emotional beings because that's a huge part of my process. You can find me at howtobealion.com. And if people are listening to this and are emotional, I am doing a course with my friend James at the end of August. So I don't know when this is going out, but
Before
it might
then.
keep getting pushed back because we keep having people being like, I'm still riding my wave. And then we're like, let's just push it back. And like, who knows?
How
That's
long
just
are
the
these
emotion.
waves? I know.
Yeah, that's just
You
the
gotta be
emotional
patient,
process.
man. I didn't even think about that. Like,
Yeah. I mean, when
Ugh.
he first asked me to do it, I was like, yeah, a month should be enough time. Cause I just thought about my own process, how like I pretty much know within a month if I'm going to do a course or not. But then something happened and it ended up being only 3 weeks. And then I was like, I kind of knew that that wasn't going to be enough time for people. So yeah. Anyways, it starts at the end of August. It's a 10-week course, classes every other week. And we're really just going to go really deep into that emotional process. So I'm really excited about that and to see how it turns out. But yeah, it's pretty much it. I also have a podcast called the Emoting Podcast. So lots of emotional stuff here.
I
That's
love it.
my MO.
I love it. It's your EM.
Yeah.
Emotional. Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thank you so much again for coming on. We love our guests, and we're going to keep trying to have more guests, mostly selfishly, so we can talk to people. But we love being able to share different points of view because we only have so many between the two of us. So we got to get others. Right, Rebeka?
That's right.
All right. All right, guys. We'll see you
All right,
later.
thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.